Hello, my name is Philip Topham. For those that don't know me, I run the Savvy Founder, obviously all about AI for private companies. I've been digging into how the global variables work and created this little MindStudio workflow so that I could fully understand how things were working. So let me share what I've learned so that it make it a little bit easier for you. First off, what is this workflow that we're looking at? Essentially, it is a workflow that I built a function that simply demonstrates how I can take a username, user ID, login time, and save it to a global variable, and then use that subsequently in the workflow. And so there's a few tricks that you need to really understand what's going on. First off, we are grabbing a user key. I am not using the word user ID because that you'll see later that conflicts or could conflict with the user ID word name of a variable that MindStudio uses. I use a user name, these are both required. I grab the last login from when the person starts this program. You'll see how that runs, and I record a message in that. This was all generated through the generate function down here. It even created some examples of what it should look like, what the messages for the keys should look like when it's login and successful, or when the person logs in but they've changed their name. Let's briefly look at the workflow itself. This starts with username, user key, username. These are passed into the workflow. You'll notice that it's passing in the user key, username, again with the brackets to indicate it's a MindStudio variable. And then whatever comes out of this function is saved into this JSON login info. And it's subsequently, that information, that JSON login information, is subsequently sent to Slack. And you'll notice that here it has to be JSON and then the variable name so that it's displayed in a very nice, pretty manner. You can additionally access the global variables, and we'll take a look at that. But if you forget to do the JSON, you'll just see a object and you won't be able to use it. Additionally, you can use the JavaScript dot notation to access specific variables within the object itself. So within the login info, if you wanted to just get to the username, you can do that. So let's dive in and just run this once to see what's going on. Actually, before we do that, let's come over here and take a look at you find the global variables that have been set up by clicking on your stuff, global variables. Right now I have some global variables here. Let's take a look at what they look like. Username, some messages, another person, some messages. Oftentimes you'll want, when you're developing the app, you'll want to refresh. This does not automatically refresh. So if you've changed the global variables while you're running a workflow in debug mode, then you'll need to refresh. I'm going to go ahead and delete this global variable. And you can have multiple global variables. In this case, I just have the single user login history, but you could have multiple ones come in here. Another variable. Um, and you'll see that it adds there. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these so you can see exactly what happens in this program. So instead of running, you can run this from an API. In this case, I'm just going to simply run it from the preview, run into debugger mode. What am I passing in? I need to pass in a user key, John123, a username, Johnny, the great Johnny Depp. I'm going to run. And you notice it did not update the global variables. Have to hit refresh, and you can see that it saved Johnny the message last successful, his name, his login, and this function is saving the last three. If we run this again, refresh, we'll see that we added a second time date. I've got it wired up so that it automatically comes into this Learn MindStudio stuff. We ran it twice, and you can see that it came in, the information came in. Here's the last login information, Johnny, the great Johnny Depp. Here's the global variables. You can see this the first time it's run, just the singular name, and then a second time. And this is what happens if you don't use that JSON I talked about. And if you wanted to get just the name, you can do that as well. Let's go back and run this again. But instead, let's just change this to Bob 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll make his name Bob Acquire. Again, come in here, refresh. You can see now we have the Bob. And here's the latest Slack. It adds Bob McGuire. That's just the singular result. And then I can also get the entire global results of everything that's in the global. And again, the other pieces. A couple of things that are tricky, or were tricky for me, is the AI variables are stored in this global. So even though up here it says global.user login history, when you come into the function itself, you need to fully qualify it with the ai.vars.global login history. In this case, since it doesn't exist, I'm making sure to add one. And then there's some other logging that I did just to see what was going on. We're passing in the variables. Now, these are variables that they're not global, right? We're passing in something. They're not a global variable yet. They're just passed in as an ai.var user key and then username. I'm saving them here as user key and username as constant, so it's easier for me to reference. The date is referenced here. And then we come down here and we check in the global user log history to see if that person, this user key, if it exists, and then we add it and iterate through this. I'm not going to explain the JavaScript, it's beyond the scope of this, but understand that this main thing is you have to use is if you're dealing with the global variables, it's the ai.vars.global. If you're dealing with the configuration or the runtime for just this thing, it's the ai.vars. And then when you've done whatever processing or computer programming you want to do and you want to return a value, what best practice is you create a singular variable. In this case, the output context, you load in what you want to send back. This is the JSON package of information I want to return. And when you return it, we're returning the output and we're stuffing it back into, you have to use the AI vars. And this is what was tricky. You have to use the configuration. So this is the configuration of this module. It's going to grab whatever you called it. And we'll look at that in a second. But this is how you pass in the output. You have to make sure you have the output and this complete entire line, and then you'll be able to use it later. So what do I mean by that? If we look here in the configuration, it's storing the JSON login info here. Might make it a little bit easier here. Gone and created this little thing. Just as recap, You edit your global variables. It's global.keyname is what's displayed, but when you're programming, you have to use the AI.vars global.keyname, a fully qualified name. Remember to refresh. Whenever you want to return the function, you should put it in a single object. So we create a single object and we pass it back into this output var. And again, this output var is literally mapped. Whatever's here ends up becoming your output variable. So when you say this, it's basically saying create ai.vars.json.loginfo and set that to this output. And so that's how it's getting passed back and forth. With that, I hope I made your life a little easier so you can understand how the global variables are working. And since they are global variables, if we ended up creating a new workflow, we have access to everything that is in this global variable. Just keep in mind, you have to think about how which workflow is accessing this information and whether you want that to happen or not, and avoid conflicts. Feel free to reach out to me. I can be found on philip@thesavvyfounder.com. I'm also on Discord as Philip. And finally, if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to connect Philip Topham on LinkedIn. Thanks.